In the spring of 1829, a tenant farmer working the fields near the Delaware-Maryland border made a discovery that would expose one of America's most chilling criminal enterprises. His plow horse sank into the ground suddenly, revealing a wooden chest buried beneath the soil. The skeleton of what appeared to be a man was inside, his bones yellowed with age, and his skull showing clear signs of violence. This was just the beginning. Authorities would discover at least 7 dead bodies over the next few weeks. People, including 3 children, are present on this property, all victims of a woman whose name had already become a whispered terror throughout the Delmarva Peninsula, Martha Patty Cannon. For Cannon had operated what historians now refer to as the reverse for nearly 2 decades. The Underground Railroad was a group that sold free African Americans and escaped slaves back into slavery, bondage in the Deep South. But there was more to this than just human trafficking. Cannon was also a serial killer who killed competitors in the slave trade, witnesses and even children when they posed a threat to her operations. Court records from Sussex County, Delaware, demonstrate that she was charged with 4 murders, though witnesses claimed the actual number was greater than 20. Prior to our discussion, please let me know what you think about Patty Cannon's reign of terror along the Mason-Dixon line. From which city or state are you listening? Cannon's criminal network had a much wider reach than just Delaware. Stronghold, touching communities from Philadelphia to the Mississippi Delta. Leave a comment and let me know where you're hearing this story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. These gloomy sections of American. It is right that history be remembered. If those buried remains were discovered, it would ultimately unravel a criminal conspiracy that had operated with virtual impunity for more than a decade, shielded from jurisdictional ambiguity, racial prejudice, and the straightforward fact that the majority of its victims were people whose disappearances went largely unnoticed by white society. The area where Patty Cannon's terror empire was built specifically for criminal activity. In the early 1800s, the region now known, since Reliance was situated at the crossroads of 3 jurisdictions, Sussex County in Maryland's Delaware, Caroline, and Dorchester counties. This advantageous location enabled criminals to literally cross county and state boundaries in order to evade law enforcement. The spot was so remote that locals called it Johnson's Crossroads, named for the tavern that would become the headquarters of the most notorious kidnapping ring in American history. The setting itself appeared to be made for concealment. Dense pine and oak forests extended for miles, separated only by marshy areas and isolated farmsteads in small clearings in the countryside. The Nantoke River wound through the region, providing waterways that could transport captives silently under cover of darkness. Cart paths were all that remained of roads, and the nearest substantial horseback travel was days away from towns. For someone seeking to operate outside the law, it was an ideal location. Martha Cannon, called Patty by those who knew, she had entered this borderland in the year 1790. Court records suggest she was born around 1760, possibly under the name Lucretia Patricia Hanley, though she kept her origins deliberately vague. According to some accounts, she was born in Canada, and at the age of 16 immigrated to Delaware. Her marriage to Jesse is what has been documented. Cannon, a farmer from the area who owned land near the state line. Together, they appeared to live a mundane rural life, and had at least 1 daughter. Jesse Cannon was described by neighbors as a quiet man who kept to himself, working his small farm and cultivating corn and tobacco like dozens of other settlers in the area. The Cannon homestead sat on a modest plot of land that straddled the Delaware-Maryland border, a detail that would prove crucial to Patty's later criminal activities. The house itself was a simple 2-story structure built in the typical of the time, with small windows and thick wooden walls. The neighbors were unaware that this seemingly ordinary home would soon house secret rooms and hidden spaces designed to conceal kidnapped human beings. But beneath this veneer of normalcy lay something far darker. The 18th century represented a pivotal time in American slavery. When Congress banned the importation of enslaved people from Africa in 1808, the demand for human labor in the expanding cotton fields of a lucrative domestic market was established by Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama. Before the ban, a healthy adult slave might have cost $300, but now it sold for over $1,000 in the Deep South. Strong incentives were created by this price increase. Criminals who are willing to trade in human suffering. The economic transformation of the South following the invention of the demand for enslaved labor had become insatiable as a result of the cotton gin. Cotton production was expanding rapidly across the Gulf Coast states, and planters were willing to pay premium prices for workers. Since it was illegal to import African slaves, the only source of new enslaved people was the domestic population, either naturally increasing or by capturing and enslaving free African Americans. The Delmarva Peninsula was particularly vulnerable to these predators. Following the Revolutionary War, many enslaved people had been freed through individual acts of emancipation or gradual emancipation laws by their owners' manumission. Delaware and Maryland both had large populations of free African Amerindians who were employed as artisans, laborers, and small farmers. These, despite their legal independence, communities lived in constant fear. They lacked any mighty protectors, had limited legal recourse, and frequently had unreported or uninvestigated disappearances by white authorities, who viewed them as less than fully human. The legal status of free, at best, life for African Americans in the early 1800s was precarious. While they were not, they had few of the rights that white people had because they were slaves. They could not vote, serve on juries, or testify against white defendants in most courts. They were in danger of losing their freedom at any time, required to carry papers proving their status. For criminals such as Patty Cannon, these legal vulnerabilities created opportunities for exploitation. Into this environment stepped Patty Cannon, a woman who would prove that evil recognizes no gender boundaries. Contemporary accounts describe her as a large, physically imposing woman with unusual strength for her gender. She stood nearly 6 feet tall in an era when most women barely reached 5 ft. And she possessed what neighbors described as an intimidating presence. She had a reputation for violent outbursts, and a deep and commanding voice. When they cross, her husband Jesse died under mysterious circumstances around 1826. Later it was alleged that she poisoned him, leaving her a widow with complete control over the family's assets. She had already begun making connections with criminals this time, connections that would make her name synonymous with terror. Local law enforcement was virtually non-existent in the rural border region, and what little authority existed was often corrupt or simply overwhelmed by the scale of criminal activity. The social dynamics of the region also favored criminal enterprises. The white population was sparse and often transient, consisting largely of small farmers, laborers, and people seeking to escape their pasts in more settled areas. There was little sense of community cohesion, and neighbors often minded their own business, regardless of what they might suspect about their neighbors' activities. This isolation and indifference would prove crucial to Cannon's ability to operate undetected for so many years. The transformation from a frontier widow to a criminal kingpin, Patty Cannon started with her daughter's marriages in a pattern that would define the next 2 decades. The young women's husbands were sold as slaves by kidnappers. Her first husband, Henry Brighton, was a blacksmith who supplemented his income by capturing, in the South, free African Americans for sale. Brighton was detained in 1811 and sentenced to prison for kidnapping in Georgetown, Delaware, but he managed to get out that same year. Brighton's criminal activities had been well known in the local community long before his arrest. He had, as a blacksmith, legitimate reasons to travel throughout the region, visiting farms and settlements to shoe horses and repair tools. This mobility provided perfect cover for his illegal activities. He would identify potential victims during his legitimate business calls, noting which families had teenage children or young adults who might bring high prices in southern slave markets. The early kidnappers' methods, including Brighton's, were often crude but effective. They relied on deception, overwhelming force, and the isolated nature of rural life to capture their victims, a common approaching free African American families with job opportunities in faraway places was the strategy. Parents desperate for economic opportunities for their children would sometimes allow them to travel with these supposed employers, only to find out too late that they had signed the death warrants for their children. It was after his escape that the Cannon family was the target of the first known murder. Brighton, together with another criminal named Joseph Griffith, they ambushed a slave trader named Rigidale at Cannon's Tavern. The plan was simple but brutal. Get the victim drunk, rob him of his money and slaves, then eliminate the witness. According to court records, Rigidale was shot and killed during the robbery. Brighton and Griffith were eventually captured and hanged on April 13, 1813, but Patty Cannon escaped prosecution. The Rigidale assassination marked a significant uptick in crime. With Rigidale's murder, Patty Cannon's family enterprise had crossed a threshold. No longer was it only about kidnapping and selling human beings for profit. Now it carried the unmistakable mark of organized violence. Cannon herself began to assume the role of strategist rather than mere accomplice, while her sons-in-law and associates executed the captures and transport. She controlled the logistics, deciding which victims would be sent south, which accomplices could be trusted, and which loose ends had to be eliminated. In the years that followed, Cannon's Tavern at Johnson's Crossroads became the unofficial headquarters of this criminal syndicate. Farmers and travelers came through for food and drink, but in its shadowed corners deals were struck for the sale of human lives. Witnesses later recalled how wagons were seen arriving under cover of night, their cargo hidden by tarps and straw. Captives were sometimes chained in the cellar or held in hidden rooms until transport could be arranged. To the casual eye, it was just another roadside tavern. To those who knew better, it was the beating heart of a human trafficking empire. The brutality of the Cannon gang was not limited to their victims. Associates who betrayed the group, or even hinted at disloyalty, often disappeared. Rumors circulated that Patty herself had drowned a young woman in a pond for threatening to alert authorities, while others spoke of bodies buried in shallow graves scattered across the countryside. Although few of these tales were ever officially documented, the discovery of multiple skeletons in 1829 lent terrifying weight to the local legends that had circulated for decades. By the mid-1820s, Patty Cannon's name was spoken in hushed tones throughout the Delmarva Peninsula. Free black families lived in constant fear of the night raid, the sudden knock at the door, or the mysterious disappearance of loved ones. Even poor white laborers knew better than to cross her or her men. The tavern at Johnson's Crossroads stood not only as a symbol of lawlessness, but also as a reminder of how one woman exploiting geography, prejudice and weak institutions could reign unchecked in the shadows of America's early republic.